Is it possible for a man to defeat a vampire?
Can a man beat a vampire? Not with force, not with fear, but with something else. The question isn't who wins the fight, it's whether a man can stand in the darkness and still choose to become more.
The sanctuary was silent, save the faint drip of water echoing through the stone.
Shadow poured like ink down the Gothic arches of Eldur's Hall, dark, beautiful, and old, a place of contemplation carved from ruin. Simon Winter stood beside the fire pit, his chrome mask reflecting the flames in fractured gleams. He held a glass of dark wine in one hand, but had not sipped. Across from him, seated in a tall-backed chair carved from obsidian, sat Eldur. His long grey hair framed a face that once inspired legends and nightmares alike. His eyes, still red with the echo of ancient hunger, were softer now. Watchful, almost human. "You've come a long way since we first met, old friend," Winter said, his voice calm, sincere. "You've changed more than most creatures do in several lifetimes." He looked at Eldur directly. "With Eldritch gone, I'd say you are the most powerful of your kind, not just in raw strength, but in mind." Eldur gave a slow breath, as if exhaling centuries. "There is no need to praise me, Simon," he said quietly. "My time with Eldritch, it was more than conversation. It was a mirror turned inward, a page turned. I learned things I had never dared face." Winter raised an eyebrow, silent. Eldur continued, "I once tried to kill you. I hunted the Alpha. I nearly brought extinction upon mankind. For centuries I saw humans as cattle, insects, shadows to be scattered." His hand tightened on the edge of the chair. "But I've also helped. Serana, even you. I've stood between the abyss and the ones about to fall into it. Sometimes I wonder, am I the blade or the hand that wields it?" Winter smiled, not mockingly, but with quiet pride. "You did those things, yes," he said, "but that's not who you are. You are the force that built those deeds. That fire, that hunger, that will, it's still inside you, and it's stronger now." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "When you stop defining yourself by what you've done, good or bad, and start focusing on what you're becoming, that's when you become unstoppable. That's when even I would consider you a challenge." Eldur looked up sharply, a spark in his eye. "So you don't consider me a challenge?" Winter laughed. "That's not what I meant, Eldur." "You're saying," Eldur said slowly, standing, "that if I stripped away the past and stepped into the flame of what I could be, I'd be nothing but an insect to you." Winter chuckled. "I became who I am through my own force, my fire. I never needed anyone's approval. I've never looked back at what I've done and said, that is me. I look forward to what I can be." He took a breath, measured and heavy. "I've travelled through time, space and reality. I've battled beings that existed before language. I've reset reality itself to preserve meaning. Yet never did I claim to be any of those things. I only ask, what can I become next?" Eldur smirked. "More talk. So, without any of that, if I stripped you down, you'd say I'd be your superior." Winter tilted his head. If that's how you wish to see yourself, Elder, may it be so. Words, Elder said flatly. All I hear are words. Then what do you propose? Eldur stepped forward, and though his body held no sword, the weight of his presence filled the hall like war drums. Let's talk action. You, without your powers, your gadgets, your so-called godlike reach, just your mind, just your human fire, and me as I am, an elder. Winter stared into the flames, thoughtful. I really don't want to challenge you, Elder. We've just begun to call each other friends. Scared? Elder asked, a faint smile on his lips. Winter sighed. That won't work. I care little what others think of me, and I eliminated guilt from my mind a long time ago. Then do it for me, Elder said, voice suddenly low, not mocking, not proud, just sincere. And that was what made Simon Winter pause. Eldur's eyes brightened. Not the glow of ancient hunger, but something rarer. Excitement. Look, Simon, he began, stepping from the shadows. I know you could probably wipe me out with a single thought. Make it so I never even existed. Just blink me from the stream. Winter raised an eyebrow. I don't think in blinks. Eldur smirked. Whatever it is you do, bend in time, shaping cause and effect, dancing with gods. But what if you couldn't? What if it was just your mind, your human mind, against the powers of an elder? Winter's face remained still, but his eyes narrowed with interest. You're beginning to grasp that mind yourself, Elder. I see it in you. Thoughtfulness, awareness. You're becoming more like Eldritch each day. Elder nodded. Becoming, not being. I don't have it yet. And maybe I never will, but I want to understand it, not just through thought, but through action. He stepped closer, voice low and sharp. You can bend, shape, twist reality, or whatever it is you do. So let's test something cleaner. Best out of 3. I'll pick the first challenge. Then we go from there. Winter tilted his head. Now you have my attention. Eldur smiled, a rare and honest expression. My pick? Round 1? A battle. Let's say, somewhere in Eastern Europe. 15th century. The age of swords and siege. We each take a fortress. Similar terrain, similar forces. Both face overwhelming odds. Let's see who can hold. Winter laughed softly. Wait a second. Weren't you a fighter back then? That's an advantage. Yes, Eldur said, brushing it off with a grin. But that was long ago. I'm old now. Maybe rusty. His smirk said otherwise. Winter exhaled, gaze shifting into the middle distance, as if already calculating siege lines and troop morale. So we have a deal? We do, Eldur said, stepping forward. 1 fortress each. 1 wave of war. Let's see what your human mind can do when stripped of cosmic toys. And I get to choose the second challenge? Winter asked. Yes, Eldur replied. And the third, if it comes to that, we leave to fate. Winter gave a slow, knowing nod. All right, Eldur, but let me be clear. I'm doing this for you, for your growth, not for pride, not to win. I know you want to see me fall. Eldur interrupted quietly. Oh, Winter, it does matter. And in that final line, there was no malice, only longing. For meaning, for measure, for truth. Winter stood perfectly still, one hand resting behind his back, eyes closed. He wasn't in the moment, not yet. He was between, checking the streams, the tangled latticework of cause and consequence that flowed through reality like unseen rivers. A challenge like this, transposing two conscious beings into a synthetic timeline, one that would not disturb the delicate weave of fate or rupture the living thread of truth, was not just dangerous. It was madness, a task that would take lifetimes for lesser minds. Even Eldritch, for all his brilliance, had never dared such precision. Winter did it in the blink of an eye. He opened his eyes. "It's ready." Eldur tilted his head. "And the rules?" "When we begin," Winter said calmly, "I will have no modern tech, no tools, no access to anything beyond my natural mind. You will retain only what an elder would have in that time: strength, speed, senses, fear." Eldur nodded once. "When it ends," Winter continued, "this timeline will collapse. The world, the war, the death, it will vanish. We'll return to this moment as if none of it existed." "And if we die in there?" Eldur asked. "We reappear here," Winter replied, "but the challenge ends." Eldur smirked. "Then let it begin." And it did. In less than a second, the world cracked and reformed. Stone replaced silence. Rain replaced firelight. The sanctuary was gone. The skies darkened. The winds howled. And the year was 1472. Winter stood atop the walls of an ancient stone fortress, somewhere deep in Eastern Europe. Snow fell softly, covering the broken towers and rusting chains with a cold white blanket. Below him, a vast plain stretched into mist, fields of mud, dotted with the flicker of torches. An army. Thousands. Like ants from a shattered nest crawling toward him. He was alone, save for 100 men, archers, pikemen. A few grizzled veterans, but mostly farmers with blades. Fear in their eyes, weakness in their stance. No armor, no tricks, no gods. Just a man and a fortress. Miles away, unseen, unknown, Eldur stood upon a similar wall. His fortress was darker, older, carved into the cliffs of a forested ravine, with iron gates and jagged towers reaching like black fangs into the sky. Behind him, shadows moved, not just men, but soldiers conditioned to fear him, to worship him. 100 still, but well-trained. And beyond his field, the same. A flood of soldiers, 10,000 at least, marching with drums, banners, siege towers. Eldur breathed in the cold air. It felt familiar. The iron, the blood, the fear. But this time, it wasn't hunger in his chest. It was anticipation. Neither could see the other. Neither knew what the other would do. Each had 24 hours, 100 men, and an impossible siege. But somewhere in the back of both minds, one mortal, one eternal, a question burned. Who is stronger, the one who endures, or the one who consumes? Eldur's fortress. The air inside Castle Vargan was thick, not with smoke or fire yet, but with dread, the kind that rots in the bones. Eldur stood atop the inner wall, his long grey hair whipping in the wind, cloak billowing like shadow torn from the night itself. His crimson eyes scanned the courtyard below where his 100 men stood. Armour clattered, hands trembled on sword hilts. None spoke, none dared. They feared the enemy, but they feared him more. With a whisper, Eldur vanished, his body pulled into the darkness. A breath later, he reappeared behind them. Then again, on the wall, then in the center of them. The movement wasn't teleportation. It was instinct. Predatory motion through cracks in the world. Then he spoke. You will not run. You will not retreat. You will not fail me. His voice was thunder wrapped in silk. Ancient. Eternal. The kind of voice that made men's hearts remember every sin they'd ever buried. You will lay your lives down for me, or I will take them from you. Some flinched, some clenched fists, but all nodded. The courage that followed was not hope, it was terror transformed into purpose. Their will was not their own, but it would serve. The rumble began then, low, distant, constant. The earth trembled beneath their feet. The drums of 10,000 soldiers beating towards them, one heartbeat at a time. Eldur raised his hand and gave his orders. Spears here, archers to the east wall. Collapse the side passage. Force them to the gate. We funnel them. They come to us through the mouth of hell. He strode toward the front wall as his soldiers moved like parts of a beast. Traps were set. Burning oil reddered, stones stacked for the drop. And then they came. The sky blackened. Arrows flew like swarms of locusts. Siege towers rolled forward. Eldur's men screamed and fought. Blood splashed down the ramparts. Limbs shattered under hammers. Screams rose, and so did Eldur. He leapt from the tower like a beast born of war, crashing into the enemy lines below. His fangs tore, his blade danced, his power surged through flesh and shadow. But for all his power, his men died. One by one. Brave, yes, but not willing, not truly. Winter's fortress. Snow fell gently outside Castle Duskford. The air was cold, but not unkind. Winter stood bareheaded before his men. No mask, no armour. Just a thick wool cloak, and the eyes of a man who had seen too much and still stood tall. His 100 soldiers waited. Farmers, blacksmiths, outlaws, boys. Some held spears wrong. Some had never seen a blade drawn. He looked at each of them, not through, but into. Then he spoke. I will not lie to you. We may die tomorrow. We are outnumbered, out-armed, out-supplied. He paused. And yet, I do not ask you to fight for me. He turned slowly, eyes sweeping the crowd. Any man who wishes to walk away may do so. I will not stop you, because I believe this. A man who fights only from duty dies hollow, but a man who fights by choice, he becomes something else. You owe me nothing, and if I'm not worthy of your sacrifice, then I deserve none of it. Silence. Then one man dropped his spear and raised his fist. Another banged his shield. A third shouted, We stand with you, Winter. The roar followed like thunder. Winter smiled, softly. Then let's get to work. The preparation. Winter walked the walls, mind moving faster than flame. He looked at materials. The black powder from crushed charcoal, sulphur scraped from stone, saltpetre from the cellars. His men worked tirelessly, packing small quantities into wax-sealed cloths, tied to the ends of arrows. They melted fat into tar, mixed with spirits from the stores, and thickened it with resin and wool. The result? A sticky, flammable gel. Swords were wrapped in cloth and dipped in the mixture, then lit as the enemy drew near. At the gate, Winter oversaw the construction of a rotating defence blade, a large axle spun by ropes and counterweights, turning massive wooden arms outfitted with sharpened steel, reclaimed scythes and broken swords, a rudimentary propeller of death. Anything that came near the gate would be shredded. Buckets of pitch, ropes laced with hooks, loose stones above narrow corridors, and mirrors, polished shields, positioned to reflect the enemy's torchlight into their own eyes during nightfall. He didn't need magic. He had intellect. The battle begins. And then the army came. Thousands sweeping across the frozen plain. Winter stood atop the wall. He said no final words. His men knew. The arrows flew first, each one a firecracker of light and death. The air filled with bursts of flame. The front lines screamed as confusion spread. Flaming blades slashed down from above. Oil slicks were lit beneath enemy boots. And the gate? It held. The spinning blade tore the first wave to pieces. The second fell over the first. The third burned. And all the while, Winter stood above, calm, focused, a man, and his men fought like gods. Eldur's endgame. Blood pooled in the courtyard like ink spilled from the quill of a mad god. Eldur stood atop the bastion wall, his cloak torn, face twisted in fury. Below his men, what remained of them, broke rank. Some screamed, some dropped their weapons. All were falling. "Up, you fools!" Eldur bellowed, his voice cracking the sky. "Fight for me!" But there were barely a handful left. Less than 10. And the enemy army, still 10,000 strong, surged forward like a living storm. Eldur clenched his fists, his fangs bared. "I do not need them." He leapt off the wall, into the heart of the tide, into the belly of death, and became its master. The shadows rippled, and Eldur vanished into them. What followed was not war, it was obliteration. His form moved like black wind, impossible to track, a streak of death and hunger. His shadow stretched wide over the battlefield, a hand of pure night. Every man it touched fell where he stood, as if their souls were stolen before their bodies dropped. Screams turned to panic, panic to madness. Entire flanks crumbled before they ever saw him. Spears snapped, shields dropped, blood stained the snow in vast red spirals. Hundreds fell, thousands. And then they ran. The mighty army routed, scattered like frightened birds under a god's descending gaze. Eldur reappeared atop his fortress wall, soaked in blood, hair plastered to his face, red eyes dimly glowing through the smoke. Below him, silence, no cheers, no soldiers. His men were gone, dead, or fled, but he smiled. "I won," he whispered to himself. "There's no way Winter survives this."
Did you know there is a tale hidden in the shadows? You found the trail, but the full truth lies deeper. Check the description, if you dare.
Winter's last stand. The gates of Castle Duskford groaned under pressure. The cold night air carried the sound of thousands of boots marching in rhythm. A tidal wave of men, too many. Winter stood at the front wall, no mask, no armour, just his cloak and blade. He had lost men already, and would lose more, but he had one move left. "No more will fall because of me," he shouted. He turned, gave a single nod, and the plan, prepared under cover of darkness, was set into motion. The light of the mind. Winter had studied the field, the weather, the enemy patterns. In just 24 hours, he'd overseen the construction of elevated signal masts, hollow wooden shafts angled outward from the walls and filled with quick-burning resin, powdered sulphur, pitch, and crushed seashells mixed with lime to reflect light. At the base of each mast was a fast ignition system, oil-soaked rope fuses, twisted through straw tubes, primitive timed charges. They weren't weapons, they were weapons of perception. As the enemy charged, the masts were lit. The towers exploded into blinding white fireballs, shooting upward and outward like artificial dawn, a mix of magnesium-rich soil, reflective powdered lime, and burning wax created intense, short bursts of white light, powerful enough to stun vision for minutes. The front wave of the enemy army reeled back, disoriented, blinded in the pitch of night. The trick: Winter had prepared cloth-wrapped eye shields for his men, woven with ash-soaked wool, dyed with soot, and reinforced with thin, oiled leather. They weren't pretty, but they worked. And in that chaos, when vision failed and panic set in, Winter struck. From behind the walls, his men released oil-slick barrels onto the battlefield via chutes. As they rolled into enemy formations, flame arrows followed, igniting the field. The fire didn't kill many, but it broke the enemy's mind. He saw darkness, then light, then flame, then confusion. Formations collapsed, and Winter's walls held. Morning came slow, grey, silent. Winter moved among the wounded, binding, lifting, whispering. Half his men were gone. The rest bore the weight of what they'd survived. "Help the wounded," Winter said. "All of them." He stepped into the snow alone, looking out at the empty battlefield. No cheers, no horns, just ash. And then he looked upward, into the colourless sky, and spoke. This was not victory. Force is not strength. Force is what the unthinking choose. When they no longer know how to reason, it is the tool of those who have nothing else. He looked at his hands, shaking, blood-streaked. Even when force is justified, it leaves scars on the world and the soul. I survived, but that doesn't make me right. He closed his eyes. If this is what strength looks like, then let it be the last thing I ever reach for first. And with that, he returned inside, back to those who remained, not as a savior, but as a man who knew the cost. And just like that, in a blink, the blood, the mud, the screaming was gone. They stood once again within Eldur's Sanctuary. Firelight flickered against the ancient walls, casting long shadows across the floor as if the battle had followed them back, refusing to be forgotten. The timeline had collapsed. The simulation ended. Eldur stood tall, his long grey hair hanging like soaked silk, though he was no longer wet. A strange smile curved across his lips. "I won," he said. He turned towards Winter, calm, still, eyes distant. "You failed, didn't you, Winter?" Winter's reply came slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look at Eldur at first. "Yes, Eldur, I failed." He stepped forward, placing one hand on the obsidian table between them. "I lost half my men, half. There was a time I wouldn't have cared. A time when I would have burned the ashes of mankind if it served my vision. That was who I was then." He looked up now, eyes meeting Eldur's. "But not now. Now I am someone who seeks to learn, to grow, not to dominate, not to destroy. And in that, I failed, because I should have seen the cost coming." Eldur furrowed his brow. Something in him shifted, not visibly, but internally, like stone grinding against stone. "Half?" he repeated. Winter nodded. "I would have taken their place. Had it been possible, not as a sacrifice. That's not my right. They were the ones who gave, not me." There was a pause, and then Eldur slowly sat down. His voice came quieter than before, measured. "In truth, I lost all of my men." He stared into the fire as if trying to divine something from its flicker. "I used them as shields, as weapons. I stood above them, not with them. I gave orders, demanded loyalty, but when the tide turned, they died. Not for me, but beneath me. And when I stood alone, I told myself I'd won. But it wasn't victory. It was vengeance. Empty. Cold." His voice cracked, not with weakness, but with the tremor of truth, pushing through centuries of armor. "They feared me. That fear made them fight. But they had no choice. And that was not leadership. That was tyranny." He looked to Winter now, not as an equal in power, but as a man grasping for understanding. "I was wrong." Winter didn't move. Then, with a faint smile, "Then you win this round, Eldur." Eldur blinked. "What? I lost all my men?" Winter nodded. "Yes, but you have grown. You have looked at the person you were on that battlefield and declared that he was wrong, that you are no longer him. That is growth." He stepped forward. "I, on the other hand, I led good men into war, knowing they would die, knowing the cost, knowing what I was asking, and I did it anyway. I did not become something new. I simply played the part I've always played. I did not fall because I failed. I fell because I knew better." Eldur was silent now, and the fire crackled between them like a soft drumbeat in the dark. "You changed?" Winter said. "I stayed the same, and in that, you surpassed me." The fire in Eldur's sanctuary crackled low, though neither of them felt the cold. Winter stood in silence for a long time, his hands folded behind his back, eyes locked on the flickering embers. Eldur watched him, not impatient, but expectant. He could feel it, the shift, the pivot. This wasn't war, this wasn't dominance. This was Winter's move. Then came the voice, low, precise, without need for force. "I know those men did not truly exist," Winter said, "but they will forever be remembered, because I remember them." He stepped forward, not as victor, but as man. "I failed, not because I lost men, but because I knew better, and chose wrongly. Error through ignorance can be growth, but error while knowing better, when reason is present and still dismissed, that is a fall." He exhaled softly. "You're round, Eldur." A pause. Eldur, for once, said nothing. Winter turned then, slowly, with the air of one who had considered every outcome, and now spoke not to defeat, but to awaken. "You ask for a challenge, one worthy of you, one worthy of me." He nodded once. "Then we return to where it all began, to the tundra, to the village that chased you into the ice." Eldur's head lifted slightly. "You know of it?" Winter smiled faintly. "I know everything. Every broken step that made you. The blood, the hate, the fear. I am offering you a chance to walk into that place again, not as a monster, but as a man." Eldur narrowed his eyes. "So I walk unarmed into the mouth of the past. And what? Let them burn me again?" "No," Winter said. "Not this time." He stepped closer. You will walk into that place as you are, a vampire, an elder, known and seen. Eldur's expression remained unreadable. And we live there, among them. No force, no illusions, no orders, no fear. You expect them to welcome me? No, Winter said. I expect them to judge you. And I expect you to earn something greater than fear. Trust, respect, value. Eldur was silent again. Winter continued. And it is a challenge for me as well, because I will be tested in ways even I have never faced. I cannot lead by logic alone. I must coexist. I must influence, not with intellect, but with integrity. And if they turn on us, if they choose fear over reason, I will not intervene with power. We must both be chosen, or we fail. The fire popped. Eldur's eyes glowed faintly, crimson in the half-light. You're asking me to stand among those who once chased me into an icy grave and become worthy of them? No, Winter said. I am asking you to prove to yourself that you no longer need to be the thing they feared. And you? Winter nodded slowly. I will stand there with nothing but my mind. And if that's not enough to make them listen, then I will learn what I have not yet dared to see, that even the highest reason may be useless when the world chooses fear. Eldur looked down for a moment, then back up. You designed a challenge where neither of us can dominate, and both of us can fall. Winter smiled. Exactly. The challenge of becoming. In a village lost to snow and memory, two beings, one made by logic, the other by fire, will face a world that owes them nothing and demands everything. Chapter 1. The Servant and the Elder. The village lay silent beneath the weight of snow. Its crooked wooden rooftops bowed like tired men under the relentless white. Time had not softened this place. The walls, patched and splintered, still whispered of blood spilled on their doorsteps. This was the same village that had once hunted Eldur, the same fire-lit mob that had driven him screaming into the frozen waters, where the ice had swallowed him whole. Now he had returned. He no longer came as the shadow of death, no longer as the monster they feared. There was something different in him, though whether it was growth or simply age rotting the heart, only time would tell. The crypt beneath the old chateau became his refuge. Once a cellar for wine and grain, it was now a throne room of shadows. Cold stone walls, damp and groaning with the weight of centuries, wrapped around him like a coffin. He rested there, pale and unmoving, yet his presence filled every inch of the space like a held breath. And Winter, not the god, not the architect of realities, but a man, stood above, watching over him. He had agreed to this role, not as humiliation, but as a test. If Eldur was to face the village, Winter would face something equally alien: servitude. The rules of this challenge were unspoken, but absolute. Winter could not dominate with his mind, nor bend reality with intellect. Here, he was merely the hand that carried wood to keep the fire lit, the eyes that scanned the roads for danger, the voice that spoke in hushed tones to villagers who glanced at the old house with suspicion, a servant, a guardian, a man who, by day, must convince the living that the shadow in the crypt would not devour them. "You look at me as if I'm still that creature." Eldur's voice crept from the stone stairs, low and predatory, though softer now. "And are you wrong?" Winter remained by the door, leaning on a rough-hewn staff. He had stripped himself of the tools and titles of power. His cloak was simple, patched with care, his hands raw from labor. "I do not look at what you were," Winter said. "I look at what you are choosing to become." Eldur arose, slow and deliberate, his long grey hair spilling over his shoulders like smoke. His crimson eyes burned faintly in the candlelight. "Become?" He echoed, the word bitter. "I was forged in blood. I was feared, hunted, and drowned by this village. They are not innocent. Why should I bow to them?" Winter stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. "Because force cannot build trust. Because a man, or an elder, who rules by fear will never be chosen, only endured. You want them to see you as more than the shadow that once stalked their doors. Then you must be more." Eldur tilted his head, as if tasting the words. A smile flickered, sharp and mocking. "And you, my servant, would protect me from them. You, who once faced gods, now tend to my crypt like a dog at his master's heel." Winter's gaze did not flinch. "To serve does not mean to kneel. I stand here because I choose to. I protect you because this challenge is ours, not yours alone. You cannot face them without me, and I cannot prove my strength without enduring this role." Above them, the old wood of the chateau creaked. A villager passed by, pausing to glance at the house before hurrying on. Rumours had already begun to spread, of strange lights in the windows, of a tall, pale man glimpsed by moonlight. The village still remembered. "They will never forgive me," Eldur murmured, his voice heavy with something that almost resembled regret. "Even if I spoke of life instead of blood, they would spit at my shadow." Winter placed a hand on the cold stone wall, leaning in as he spoke with quiet steel. "Then make them see you, Eldur. Not the shadow, not the predator. You." There was silence for a long moment. In that silence, there was no vampire, no man, only two beings who had both, in their own way, lost pieces of themselves to time. Eldur finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "Very well. Let them judge me, but when they come with torches, will you still stand at my side?" Winter smiled faintly. "I will, not because you need me, but because I choose to." The first night in the village had begun, and with it, the real test, not of power, but of who they had become. Chapter 2. Whispers in the inn. The village square lay quiet beneath the pale wash of moonlight. Frost clung to the crooked beams of the old houses, and the church bell, long rusted, hung still, as though even it feared to break the silence. Beyond the square, smoke curled lazily from the chimney of the Black Hart Inn, its crooked sign creaking in the bitter wind. Inside the inn was warm, but uneasy. Villagers sat hunched around rough-hewn tables, their faces half hidden in the glow of candlelight. The air was thick with the scent of ale, wood smoke, and whispers. Old Gregor, the innkeeper, was muttering about wolves again, how the cold had made them bold, how they came too close to the village. No one answered him. All were waiting for something. The door slammed open. Peter, the woodcutter, stumbled in, his face pale as bone. "They're back," he spat, his voice trembling, but loud enough to catch every ear. "I saw the lights in the old chateau." A murmur rippled through the room. Chairs scraped against the floor. "Lights!" Old Gregor narrowed his eyes. "A storm lantern, perhaps some vagrant—" "No," Peter cut him off. "It's him, the one they whispered about long ago, the pale one, the one they drove into the ice." His hand shook as he slammed his mug onto the counter. "I saw his face in the window, glowing like death, and he's not alone. There's another, a man, a servant, they say, like a dog, but worse. Keeps the creature safe during the day." The room went quiet for a heartbeat. Then the talk began to rise. "Servant," a farmer muttered, his voice low and fearful. "Aye," said Peter, nodding, his eyes wide. "I've heard of such creatures. Twisted minds, bound to the will of the monster, a shadow in human skin." A woman clutched her shawl tighter. "And what of Marta?" she whispered. "She was found last week, pale as the moon, with marks on her neck." At this, the room erupted into argument. "It's wolves!" Gregor snapped. "No wolves leave marks like that," another man barked. "This is the same evil that cursed this village years ago, the same blood drinker we buried under ice. It's come back." Peter leaned in, his voice hoarse but certain. "And you all know what happens if we sit here waiting. More will die. He'll feed. His servant will bring him what he needs." He spat on the floor, his teeth clenched. "We must burn it out. Burn the chateau. Burn him before it's too late." A few heads nodded. The whispers grew sharp, fearful. The innkeeper's hand shook as he wiped the counter, his eyes darting to the door, as though expecting it to burst open. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the village, the chateau stood silent. Eldur slept in the crypt below, his mind stirring faintly as though he could sense their words. And Winter walked the perimeter of the old house, a simple lantern in his hand, his gaze sharp and unflinching. He had heard this kind of whisper before, in another life, and knew what it would become. Chapter 3. The Mind in the Madness. Morning broke pale and cold over the village. The night's frost still clung to the roofs, turning each thatch into silver needles. The square was empty, but restless, as though it held its breath. Winter had secured the chateau, every door barred, every window shuttered, ensuring Eldur remained safe in the crypt. Then he turned towards the village. He would face them alone. The Black Hart Inn was alive with noise when he entered. A fire burned low in the hearth, but the room was thick with the heat of fear turned anger. Villagers huddled around the tables, not drinking for pleasure but whispering, plotting. Their eyes were wild, their words sharp and scattered like broken glass. Winter stepped inside, his cloak heavy with morning dew. The room fell silent. Dozens of eyes turned toward him, some wary, others openly hostile. A few looked at him as if they already knew. This is the servant of the Pale Devil. "You speak of monsters," Winter began, his voice calm, measured. He moved no closer to them, but his presence seemed to fill the space. "But you see only shadows of your own making. Fear, once unchecked, becomes its own beast." The villagers muttered. Someone spat on the floor. Old Gregor, the innkeeper, slammed his fist on the bar. "We know what you are. You walk with that thing in the chateau. You bring death upon us. Marta's blood is on your hands." Winter tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable, but his tone unshaken. "What killed Marta was not a monster, but your refusal to understand. You speak of burning, of killing, but you have not once asked why. You are like men trapped in a room with the dark, slashing at it instead of lighting a candle. The room erupted with shouts. A man in the corner shouted, "He speaks like the devil's tongue. Do not listen." Another hissed, "He's bewitched. A servant of the blood drinker." Winter's gaze hardened, though his tone remained even, like steel wrapped in silk. If you have no mind to think, if you choose madness over reason, then you are already lost. A mind that refuses to see is no better than a beast with teeth. It was at that moment he knew they would not hear him. There was no reason here, only noise, the chaos of frightened animals, dressed as men. He felt the weight of that chaotic fear, to be a mind surrounded by the mindless. The room was not full of people. It was full of hollow eyes and snarling mouths. Gregor pointed at him. "Take him!" They moved as one, clumsy but determined. Hands seized his arms. A rope, rough and damp, was thrown around his shoulders. Winter did not struggle. He stood still, eyes burning with quiet defiance as they tied his wrists. "Do you think ropes can bind a mind?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "Do you think force makes you strong? You are not men, but a pack of frightened dogs chasing shadows." But they did not hear him. The mob had already decided. Shouting, they dragged him outside into the cold, their boots stamping in the snow, voices rising in a single cry. "To the chateau! Burn the devil and his servant!" Chapter 4. The shadow and the mob. The crypt stirred before the first torch was lit. Eldur's eyes snapped open in the dark. His senses, sharper than any mortal's, stretched beyond stone and frost, beyond the crooked roofs of the village, beyond the forest. He could feel the weight of movement, the heat of fear, and the chaos rolling toward the chateau like a wave of fire. He felt Winter too, bound, cold, yet standing firm amidst the madness. A thin, cruel smile touched Eldur's lips. "You tried to win this one, Winter," he murmured, his voice like wind in a tomb. "You tried to tame beasts with words, but words fall on deaf ears when the mind is gone. This is the fear you face now, to be the only voice of reason in a room filled with the screaming void. You might as well speak to stones, for stones have no madness. They do not claw and bite at truth." He rose slowly, his long grey hair cascading over his shoulders like a dark river. His pale hands brushed the damp walls as he ascended the steps of the crypt. "When they drove me out before," he continued, speaking to no one but himself, "I was weak. I did not understand my power. I let them chase me into the ice, thinking I was a monster, simply because they called me one. I cowered in the dark, while they feasted on their own ignorance." His crimson eyes narrowed as the sound of distant shouts filled the air. "Now I could slaughter each and every one of them. I could drain the village to ash. I could burn their homes and their children's names from memory. I could kill you too, Winter, if I chose it." He stopped at the top of the stairs, his hand on the wooden door. For a moment, his gaze softened, a flicker of something unspoken. "But if I do, what becomes of this challenge? What becomes of me?" The door creaked open. Outside, the mob gathered, wild-eyed and snarling. They carried torches, pitchforks, axes, everything a frightened mind could fashion into a weapon. Their shouts filled the air, jagged and senseless. Eldur stepped forward, tall and motionless, the torchlight painting his pale face in shades of fire and shadow. The crowd recoiled slightly at the sight of him, but the fear only deepened their rage. "You know me," Eldur said, his voice carrying over the storm of their screams, deep and commanding. "You were the ones who drove me into the ice. And yes, once I was the shadow you feared. I hunted as I wished, believe in myself above life. I was wrong. His voice lowered, steady and cold, forcing silence for a heartbeat. I am here to make amends. I am here to build, not destroy. You see me as a curse, but I could be the fire that warms this village, the strength that guards its walls. Do not let fear blind you. Let me show you I can be more than death. A laugh broke out in the crowd, then another voice, sharp and bitter. Monster! Liar! The torches shook, hands trembling, not with thought, but with frenzy. Eldur's voice rose again. You live as if the dark is your enemy, but the dark is not your killer. Your fear is... A torch flew. It struck the ground at Eldur's feet, flames bursting across the dry snow. The mob roared as if victory had been claimed. They surged forward, shouting, spitting, screaming his name like a curse. Eldur looked across the yard. There, bound and bruised, stood Winter, and Winter was smiling, a small, knowing smile, not of victory, but of understanding. Eldur's hands curled into fists, the shadows at his feet rippling like waves. Chapter 5. The Shadow and the Brute. The torchlight roared brighter, licking up the walls of the old chateau as the mob screamed. Their shouts became one chaotic howl, senseless, primal, like animals caught in their own frenzy. Eldur stood in the open doorway, the fire reflecting in his crimson eyes. He did not blink. He did not flinch. Then, without a word, he rose into the air. Gasps cut through the mob's noise. Some fell to their knees, others stepped back in terror. But fear is a weapon without aim. They screamed louder, throwing more torches, the fire climbing faster. Eldur looked down at Winter, bound in ropes at the front of the crowd. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried as though the night itself listened. Words cannot reach them. Their minds are walls of madness. This is no test of reason. Then he dissolved. His body broke into waves of smoke and shadow, curling and twisting like dark wind. The mob screamed, thinking they saw death itself come alive. In a heartbeat, the shadow swept over Winter, snapping the ropes like cobwebs, and in a blink of black air, they were gone. The villagers roared with victory. They hurled torches at the chateau. Flames devoured the old walls, the roof caving in as the fire claimed everything. They're burning inside, someone screamed. The devil is dead. But in the dark woods beyond the village, two figures stood watching the flames. You tried to win them, Eldur said, his voice low and sharp, with reason, and reason cannot exist where there is no mind to hear it. You know this now. Winter, free of his bonds, dusted ash from his cloak. His face was calm, but shadowed by thought. One of the greatest horrors is not facing the strong or the wicked, he said. It is standing before those who cannot think. A brute, a madman, who rejects the mind itself. You could speak for eternity, and the void would only scream back. Eldur gave a short, humorless laugh. Perhaps that is why they drove me into the ice. Not because I was too dark, but because I was too far beyond them. I might as well have been speaking to stones. They fear anything that stands apart, Winter replied. They don't see life as a creation, but as something to consume. They destroy what they don't understand, even when that thing could save them. Eldur glanced back at the burning chateau. This challenge, you've already lost it. Your words fell on deaf ears. And me, he smiled bitterly. I could slaughter every one of them, drain them in seconds, burn their homes to ash. But that is not victory. That is just who I once was. Winter's voice cut through the silence like steel. Then choose not to be that. This challenge is not about their minds. It is about ours. You can show them you are beyond what they think you are, or you can prove them right. What you do next will decide everything." Far away, the mob began to quiet. The fire of rage burned down to embers, then a voice, shrill, panicked, cut through the night. "The wolves! The wolves are here! Hurry, hurry!" The villagers turned as one. A woman came running from the far end of the road, her apron soaked with blood. "They've taken the children. They've taken Thomas's boy. They're coming into the village. The wolves are coming for us all." The air shifted. The mob's false victory shattered, replaced with dread. They turned their eyes to the darkness beyond the fields, where the howl of wolves rolled across the snow. Chapter 6. The Wolves at the Door. The village was already breaking before the wolves came. Its people, drunk on fear and rage, had burned their strength in fire and shouts. Now, as they stumbled back into the square, the real threat waited. The wolves had come. Grey shapes slinked in from the tree line, their eyes like glints of frozen fire, their breath steaming in the bitter air. These were not supernatural beasts, just hungry predators, hardened by winter's cruelty, drawn by the scent of blood and weakness was all the villagers had left. The first scream tore the night. A woman's body lay in the snow near the fence line, torn by teeth, and beyond her, 4 children, huddled inside a tiny shed, its door rattling under the claws and jaws of the pack. The wolves scratched and dug, their snarls cutting through the cold air. The children's terrified cries were muffled but sharp, each one like a nail driven into the hearts of those watching. The villagers rushed forward with pitchforks and clubs, but the wolves did not retreat. There were too many. The first clash ended in disaster. 2 men dragged back, bleeding, as the rest fled to the safety of their own doors. Soon the streets were empty, save for the scratching and the howling. The people watched from behind shutters, helpless, as death gnawed at the walls of the shed. In the woods, Eldur stood still, his crimson eyes fixed on the village lights. He could hear everything, the scratching of claws, the thud of paws, the quickened breaths of prey. "So, this is what remains of them," Eldur murmured. "A village too weak to stand. Perhaps this is the fate they earned when they drove me into the ice. Let the wolves feast. The dark does not forgive the mindless." Winter, standing beside him, did not look at the village but at Eldur. His voice cut the night, calm and unyielding. "The past does not grant you the power to judge their future. What happened before is done. We cannot change the chains they forged back then, but we have the power, today, to decide what we become. If they fail, let it not be because we stood idle." Eldur tilted his head, amused. "You would save them, even after they tried to burn you, after they called for my death." "Their madness cannot dictate my reason," Winter replied. "To act because of who they are is weakness. To act because of who I am, that is strength." Eldur narrowed his eyes. "And what would you have me do?" "Wolves and I are not friends. We are sworn enemies, predator and predator, ever at war. If I go among them, I will rip and tear until nothing stands." Winter's mind was already racing, calculating. "Then don't confront them. Distract them. You don't need to slaughter to save. I will lead the rescue. You only need to show them who you are, not by death, but by what you choose to protect." Eldur smirked. "You want me to play the hero?" "No," Winter said, his voice like iron. "I want you to be seen." The plan. Winter gathered what he needed: a handful of dry pitch, splintered wood from the edge of the forest, and the metal shards of a broken fence. By the time they reached the village's outer fence, Eldur had taken to the shadows, his form blurring like smoke. Make them chase you, Winter whispered. Draw them away from the shed. Just long enough. Eldur's smile was thin and dangerous. You presume much, servant. Then with a blur of movement, the shadow swept into the square. The wolves froze. Something darker than them, older than them, moved between the houses. Eldur's crimson eyes burned like coals, his presence sending a ripple of fear through the pack. He did not attack, not yet. He let them see him, let them smell the blood of something far more dangerous than themselves. As the wolves snarled and gathered, Winter slipped from shadow to shadow, his mind a map of precision. He reached the shed, pried the door open just enough to whisper to the children, "Stay quiet. Follow me when I tell you." He scattered the dry pitch in a semicircle, laid splintered wood as a crude barrier, and set a small fire, its heat enough to make the wolves wary. Then, with a sharp cry and a burning branch in hand, he led the children out into the open. The wolves turned, but Eldur's shadow swept across the snow, hissing like smoke in a storm. The pack broke, panicked, and scattered into the tree line, their snarls fading into the cold night. Winter guided the children back to the safety of the square. The villagers, drawn by the chaos, stepped out from their doors, stunned by what they saw. Eldur standing in the square, tall and silent, his face unreadable, and the children alive. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The fear was still there, but something new flickered behind their eyes. Winter stood beside Eldur, his face calm, his breath steaming in the cold. Final chapter. The mind that stands alone. The square was silent. The villagers, bruised and bloodied, stood staring at Eldur and Winter. For a heartbeat, it seemed as if reason might rise, that gratitude might break through the haze of fear, but it did not. There's the monster! A voice screamed. A young man, his face pale and twisted with terror, raised a pitchfork. He's back. He brought the wolves. Burn him. Burn them both. The crowd roared again, their brief clarity collapsing into chaos. They surged forward, torches raised, blind to the truth, blind to their own salvation. They saw only what they wanted to see. A monster, and his servant. Eldur's crimson eyes blazed. "We just saved your village, your children." His voice thundered, shaking the square. "Without us, you would all be dead." But the mob didn't listen. They never did. Eldur's lips curled back, fangs flashing. "I should burn you all where you stand." Winter raised his head, his face calm, almost amused. A faint smile played on his lips as he stepped forward. He looked at the mob, not with anger, but with the detached clarity of someone who had already understood. "This is the proof," Winter said softly, as if speaking to Eldur. "This is why the challenge is done. You tried to reach them with fear, with strength, with words, but they cannot hear. Their minds are locked shut. You cannot win by pleading with the senseless." He held out his hand. The entire world shifted. The village, the snow, the wolves, the shouts. All of it dissolved like smoke. In an instant, they stood once more inside Eldur's sanctuary, its ancient stone walls lit by the cold fire of candles. Eldur looked around, his jaw tight. "What have you done?" Winter turned to him, his voice calm but edged with steel. "The challenge was never about them. It was about us. You sought their approval, thinking victory meant they must see you as more than a monster, but their minds were never yours to change." He stepped closer, his eyes sharp. "A mind that cannot think is not a mind at all. It is just noise, it is madness, and trying to win its favor is to chain yourself to its chaos. I did not fight them. I did not need to. I remained what I am, the mind that stands alone, unbroken." Eldur's expression darkened, but there was something beneath it, a flicker of reluctant understanding. "So you claim victory, Simon?" Eldur's tone was mocking, but weaker now. "You claim you have bested an elder?" Winter's voice did not rise, but its certainty filled the hall. "You failed because you believed their acceptance was worth earning. I won because I never sought it. I acted not for their gratitude, but because I chose to act. Not as a plea for their recognition, but as an extension of my will." Eldur stared at him, silent for a long moment. Then a smile, thin and sharp, curved his lips. "Very well. 1-1. His words were almost a whisper, but they carried weight. He turned away, his long grey hair falling over his shoulders like ash. "But in my mind, I won too, for the entirety of that challenge. You were my Renfield." Winter's lips curled into a faint, knowing grin. "If that comforts you, Eldur, then keep it." The candles flickered. The sanctuary fell silent. Outside, the night rolled on. End. "If you cannot stand alone in the shadows, you will not stand beside me in the vault, because what lies inside does not seek to entertain you. It seeks to confront you. The vault is not just stories.
Come closer.
It is a mirror, one that reflects what most people spend their lives running from. I do not ask for permission to speak. I tell stories because they demand to be told. Only a few will hear them. Will you?" Versus Winter, Part 3. Chapter 1. The Final Game. The shadows in Eldur's Sanctuary were deeper than before, no longer merely the absence of light. Now they seemed to pulse with anticipation, the kind of stillness that settles before a storm. The vampire stood near the obsidian window, pale fingers clasped behind his back, long grey hair like silver threads caught in the candlelight. Winter sat cross-legged on the stone floor, a mask in his lap, staring into the flame of a single candle. His hoodie was dusted with ash, remnants from the last challenge. The wolves, the shed, the helpless children. "One each," Eldur said, his voice thick with gravity. "You cost an entire army its victory. You saved a village without drawing blood. We are, it seems, equal." Winter's eyes flicked up. "Strange, isn't it? You had the first game, a test of strength, of strategy. I had the second, a test of restraint. But neither challenge was truly ours." Eldur turned slowly. "Explain." "The armies were not mine. The villagers were not yours. They were backdrops, constructs, tests made to provoke us, not to define us." Eldur arched a brow. "And yet, they did define us. You hesitated, and it cost thousands. I refused to intervene, and it spared the innocent. Both outcomes. Truthful." Winter nodded. "And both painful." They stood in silence for a long moment, the candle crackling between them. Then Eldur spoke. "So, how do we break the tie? A final challenge, yes. But who writes it? Who decides what will reveal the victor?" Winter rose slowly, picking up the chrome mask. "If either of us chooses," he said, "the deck is stacked. Your nature would carve a crucible of cruelty. Mine might lean too far toward redemption." Eldur chuckled. "So we are too biased, even to judge one another." Winter stepped closer, holding the mask, but not yet placing it on his face. "Then let reality choose." "Meaning?" "We give up control. No design, no plan, no setting of rules or scenes. We let existence itself present the next mirror, and we both stepped through it. Eldur's face darkened. You would leave it to fate? Winter shook his head. Not fate. Reality. It is the only judge not fooled by story, sympathy, or power. Eldur turned his gaze back to the dark beyond the sanctuary walls. The wind howled faintly, as though the world itself were listening. Very well, he said. Let it be reality. Winter nodded once. Close your eyes. Eldur did. So did Winter. And in that moment, the world unravelled. Chapter 2. The Hunter and the Hunger. The fire crackled low in the hearth of Eldur's cabin. Small, silent, far from any village. He stood alone, cloaked in dark leather and fur-lined armour, his hair now tied back, revealing a sharpness in his gaze, not seen since his wars of old. On the table before him lay a rolled scroll, thick parchment, browned at the edges. He unfurled it slowly. A face stared back. Painted in ink and fear, the image bore a striking likeness to Winter, but distorted now, darker. The eyes were no longer thoughtful, but hollow, the mouth twisted in a grin that hinted at something more primal. At the top of the poster, wanted, dead, for the murders in Black Vale. Eldur said nothing. Instead, he walked to the edge of the table and poured himself a drink. His reflection in the liquid shimmered, and for a moment he saw not himself, but Winter, fangs bared, crawling across a ceiling like a thing that should not be. He blinked, and the image was gone. Elsewhere, far from firelight, deep in an ancient stone castle nestled atop a ridge of craggy black rock, Winter opened his eyes. He lay in a vast bed, surrounded by silk sheets the colour of dried blood. He did not breathe. He did not need to. Slowly he rose, bare feet touching the cold stone beneath him. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with hunger. It wasn't thirst, not quite. It was something beneath that, ancient and alive, a gnawing, a whisper that filled the marrow. Winter stepped toward the mirror. There was no reflection, only the room behind him, empty, still. He looked at his hands, turning them over. Is this what it feels like? He whispered. A noise outside, a heartbeat. Somewhere below, he could hear it, smell it. His mouth twitched slightly. The instincts of a predator awakened inside him. He gritted his teeth, pressing his hand against the wall as if bracing against a wave. For the first time in his long life, Winter understood what it meant to crave without permission. Back in the hunter's cabin, bang, bang, bang. The door shook under a fist that clearly didn't care for manners. Eldur, open up. Eldur stepped forward, unbothered, and unlatched the heavy iron bolt. The door creaked wide, revealing 3 figures. Villagers, ragged and shivering from the snow. He struck again, one said, breathless.
You promised us you'd rid us of this monster. You said you'd kill that foul vampire.
The mayor's daughter this time. Ripped the roof straight off, left nothing but blood and ice. You promised us. We paid for your skill, your strength. You were the one who claimed to know these creatures. You told us you could end it, said another, older man. So where were you last night? Eldur looked past them, toward the horizon. The mountain where the castle stood, old stone hidden by storm, seemed to breathe with shadows. He's learning, Eldur said softly, becoming what he always feared. He stepped back, gathering his coat and sword. As he passed the villagers, he added, Tell your dead to wait. This ends soon. And with that, he vanished into the snow. Chapter 3. The Mind and the Hunger. The candle flickered. Somewhere deep within the crumbling citadel of Blackridge Hollow, Winter sat motionless atop a throne of stone. The wind moaned through shattered stained glass but he did not stir. He was starving. The hunger tore at his core like a splintered blade, twisting through every nerve, whispering, "Feed, feed, feed." It was not pain in the traditional sense. Pain could be compartmentalized, flinched from, ignored. This was different. This was a command. He closed his eyes. His breathing was slow, measured, unnatural for something that no longer needed breath. "I wonder," he said aloud, his voice steady, "if I can still analyze within reality's playground." He smiled faintly, then leaned forward and began to think. He disassembled the hunger, not with emotion, not with resistance, but with the mind. What was hunger but a signal, a call to action, a warning system designed to preserve the self by compelling the body to act, irrationally if needed, in order to survive. But survival for what? The vampire hunger was different from human need. This was not the body's call for calories, nor thirst for hydration. This was an impulse without purpose. It demanded he destroy, consume, degrade. And for what? There was no furthering of self, no elevation, no purpose served, only submission. Winter's eyes narrowed. A being without needs is a being without values, but a being whose only need is destruction has no self at all. He stood now, rising from the throne, and the hunger howled. It clawed at his ribs. His gums ached. His eyes pulsed red. But still, he did not move. Not toward the villagers hiding in terror. Not toward the frightened deer outside the broken portcullis. Instead, he began walking, slowly, purposefully, towards the upper chamber, where a long, broken mirror stood. And he stared. There was no reflection, but he imagined what they saw. A creature, inhuman, cold, predatory. But that was not what he saw. He saw only himself, the man who had faced down armies, outwitted gods, and defeated death itself, not with strength, but with clarity. The body is meat. The thirst is a whisper. But the mind is who I am. He tilted his head, and with pure, deliberate intent, he filed the hunger away. He placed it in a box within the cathedral of his mind and closed the lid. It still screamed, but now it was behind glass, and he no longer listened. As he walked the castle halls, snow drifting in through shattered archways, Winter spoke softly to himself. "They won't listen."
They won't listen. I could reason with them in another world. But here, in this reality...
"Not this time. They never do." He remembered the villagers, the mob, the torches. Even when he'd saved them in the previous trial, they'd turned. "Eldur, he must be the hunter now," he said aloud, without judgment. "Reality seeks balance. If I am the monster, then he must be the one sent to slay me." He paused. "It will not be enough for me to resist. I will be tested, not only in will, but in power. He will come prepared, as I would have." He stepped out onto the castle's ruined balcony, cloak billowing in the wind. Beneath him, the forest stretched wide, blanketed in moonlight and cold silence. Somewhere out there, the hunter waited. Winter's eyes glowed faintly, then dimmed. "The greatest power is not strength," he whispered, "but the knowledge of how to use it, and when not to." A beat. "I will not fall to instinct. I am not a slave to design. I am the architect of self." As he turned and descended into the catacombs, the whisper of the hunger remained, but it was no longer a master. It was a passenger, and soon he would face Eldur, but he would do so not as a beast, not even as a man, but as Winter, the mind within the monster. Chapter 4. The Climb Within. The snow crunched beneath his boots like old bones cracking. Eldur moved up the winding path alone, the cold wind slapping against his cloak like a memory he refused to bury. The sky above was bruised with twilight. The castle loomed ahead, jagged and silhouetted against a frozen world that seemed to hold its breath. And yet, he smiled, even laughed. "Now you'll know," he muttered under his breath. "Now you'll finally understand." He grinned wider, though not with cruelty. It was something else, something deeper, almost satisfied. For too long, Winter had played the role of the untouchable, the rational mind, the voice of clarity in a world choking on shadows. But hunger cared not for logic. Thirst did not reason. It only screamed. And now Winter would hear that scream. Eldur paused, gloved hand resting on a frost-covered tree. He closed his eyes. He remembered the first scream, the first kill, the moment the thirst overtook him, not as a curse, but as a justification. They always see the monster. That's what he used to tell himself. So I'll give them one. There had been no Winter then, no Serana, no Alpha, just Eldur, the beast that tore through nations, intent on ending a world that never tried to understand him. But something changed. Not suddenly. No flash of light. No miracle. Only moments. Small ones. Winter's refusal to kill. Serana's whispered grief. The Alpha's sacrifice to protect strangers. Each moment like a chisel. And slowly the monster began to crack. Not die. Transform. Eldur opened his eyes, looking up at the castle. "I used to think power meant being feared," he said softly. "Now I know. It means being understood, and still choosing to protect those who cannot understand you." He thought of Winter, pacing behind stone walls now, hungry, wrestling with a voice that knew no logic, only instinct. "You used to pity me, didn't you?" He smiled again. "You saw the blood on my hands, and thought I was lost, but you never carried the thirst. You never knew what it meant to wake with nothing but shadows inside." A long exhale. "Now you do." He took a few more steps, and something shifted inside him. Not pride, not vengeance, but relief. Relief that this had been the trial, because now they would speak not as predator and prey, not as logic and blood, but as equals. And Eldur, the creature once bent on annihilation, now climbed towards someone he once vowed to kill in order to save him. As the castle doors loomed near, Eldur stopped. He looked at his reflection in a sheet of ice frozen to the outer wall. The same face, the same grey hair, the same crimson eyes, but no longer a monster, not to himself. He nodded once and said the words that could only be spoken by a man who had once fallen and now stood. "I am not what I've done. I am what I choose next." The door creaked open. The final trial had begun. Chapter 5. The Hunter's Declaration. The ancient door groaned open like a beast in pain. Eldur stepped into the frozen silence of the castle. No torches, no guards, no movement, only dust, cold air, and the echoes of forgotten screams. He stood in the grand entryway, cloak hanging from his shoulders like a storm cloud. Snow melted at his feet, trailing behind him like a ghost. His eyes flared red beneath his long grey hair, sharpened by centuries of experience and honed hatred. Then he screamed, voice booming through the stone like thunder. "I know you're here." His fists clenched. "Show yourself, vampire. I am your slayer." His boots cracked across the marble floor as he marched forward, each step defying the silence. "There is no room you can hide in, no darkness I haven't already crawled through." He threw open a rusted door. Cobwebs clung to his cloak. A broken chandelier lay on the floor like a skeleton.
"Show yourself, vampire. I have been watching."
"You think I haven't felt the hunger you feel?" He spat. "I drank it, lived it, defeated it." He moved through the hallway, running a gloved hand along the dusty stone. room by room, chamber by chamber, each one colder than the last, each one older than his memory could name. I know every strength you hold, every weakness that whispers behind your eyes. He pulled aside a thick curtain and kicked open another door. Nothing, just a cold draft and the smell of centuries. Reality gave you fangs. I filed them down to dust. His voice lowered, but not his resolve. There is nothing you can surprise me with, Winter. Far above, in the highest room of the keep, Winter stood in silence. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't preparing. He wasn't afraid. He simply stood by the window, watching the snow fall. The chrome mask covered his face now, reflecting the frost in 1,000 fractured lines. His cloak hung still, untouched by wind. The fire within him had quieted. He wasn't speaking to Eldur, only to the air itself, to the trial, to the shadowed reality that had cast them both in this final game. He's right, Winter said softly. There is no way to win this. He paused, then added with calm certainty, apart from winning. He turned from the window. The pieces were in place. The trial had begun, and Winter, more than anyone, understood what this test truly was. Not a test of blood, but of understanding. Not a test of strength, but of truth. Chapter 6. The Shadow Unleashed. Winter stood at the heart of the castle's great hall. Its columns cracked, banners rotted, and cold light bleeding through shattered stained glass. The fire had long since died, but the air shimmered faintly around him, not from heat, but from him. He had donned the chrome mask. It fit now, not as armor, not as disguise, but as declaration. He turned slowly, his cloak brushing the broken floor tiles, and whispered to no one, "For all the times you hounded me, Eldur." The words echoed like a spell. It's time to have a little fun. He stepped forward, boots silent. Let's see what this vampiric power can do when given to a mind. Above, the stone ceiling groaned. The shadows pulsed. Winter raised his hand, and the world bent. In objectivist thought, force is a last resort, a violation of reason, of sovereignty. But when used against the man of the mind, force awakens something far worse. Precision, purpose, power with direction. Winter did not lunge. He did not roar. He calculated. And in that calculation, he rewrote the rules. From the darkness around him, he stepped aside, not moved, split. A second Winter peeled from his side like smoke folded in half, identical and calm. Then a third, each reflection exact. Thought made flesh, purpose made mirror. They stood still for a moment, then blinked out of sight. Eldur crashed through the eastern door, sword drawn, the sigils around his neck glowing faintly. His boots struck the stones like war drums. His eyes were already glowing. "I know your tricks, Winter," he shouted. "I've been you. I've killed what you've become." A whisper behind him. He turned. Nothing. A whisper to the left. A shadow flickered, then vanished. "I've slain vampire lords, elders, kings," he spat, eyes darting. "There is nothing you can do I haven't already defended against." The fire in the hearth exploded. Eldur turned just in time to raise his blade, shielding himself from a blast of frost that seared like liquid silver. It coated the wall in an instant, runic defenses glowing dimmer now. Overrun. Winter appeared in the flames, unmoving. "You're right," he said. "You've prepared for the monster." He stepped forward. "But you never prepared for me." He vanished again. From the left, a blow. From the right, another. From above, a third Winter dropped from the ceiling like liquid shadow, striking Eldur's shoulder with a crack of force. Before dissolving, Eldur staggered back, snarled, raised his hand, and unleashed light. A holy beam erupted, melting shadows and forcing all illusions to retreat. The true Winter emerged from the far wall, unscathed, still walking. You think this trial is about strength, but you missed the point. Winter's voice rang clear, not angry, but amused. It was never about whether you could defeat a vampire. He raised one finger, and the room bent sideways as if reality itself took a breath. It's about whether you could face a man who does not rely on fangs or fear. The walls turned black. The ceiling faded to stars. Snow began to fall inside the chamber. But one who understands. Eldur lunged, now silent, now seething. His blade struck Winter's side, only to pass through. Winter had turned into mist, not like other vampires, not just smoke. This mist clung to Eldur, wrapped around his arm, held it, then pushed him backwards, without touch. I am not a predator. I am not prey. I am Winter. Eldur crashed into a pillar, breaking the stone with his back. He growled, rising again, sigils glowing, but his breath was ragged now. His sword was no longer steady. He stared at the chrome mask, the mind behind the monster. The room held still. Winter didn't strike. He waited for Eldur to see, to understand, and in that pause, something deeper settled. Not victory, but revelation. Winter's voice echoed once more. This is not a contest of strength. It's a mirror, and you're not ready to see your reflection. Chapter 6. The true power. Eldur crashed through the castle's final chamber doors, roaring with fury. The ancient stone groaned under his boots as he strode into the great hall. Cobwebs, frost, and centuries-old silence shattered by his wrath. Show yourself, vampire! His voice was thunder, his rage volcanic. Winter stood calmly in the center of the chamber, cloaked in black, chrome mask gleaming. Snowfall from the broken ceiling fell in slow motion around him. His hands were folded behind his back. Eldur's lip curled in fury. You're cheating, he spat. You are a vampire, an elder. You should not have these powers. This is unfair. Winter tilted his head slightly, amused. Eldur jabbed his sword forward. This isn't you. This is some twisted manipulation of what you are. No vampire should be able to do what you've done. The silence that followed was sharp, thick, like the world had drawn breath and held it. Then Winter stepped forward, just once, and spoke. That's the problem, Eldur. You think the curse defines the man. He reached up and tapped the chrome mask. But I was a man before this, and I remained one after. He began to pace slowly, voice even, deep, deliberate. Yes, I changed. Yes, the curse wrapped around me like a second skin, but what you never understood, he turned to face Eldur directly, was that the curse doesn't decide who I am. I do. He raised a hand, and a quiet pulse of energy whispered across the room. Not force, but focus. You were turned, Eldur. So was Serana. So was Eldritch. And every one of you let go of who you were. You forgot the man. You let the world, the curse, the expectation, rewrite you. Eldur lowered his blade slightly, confused. Winter continued, voice firmer now. When I was turned, I didn't become a monster. I was given one. But a man is not what happens to him. He is what he chooses to be. In response. He stepped closer. Each word landed like stone against steel. I retained everything I was before. My logic, my memory, my principles. The change tried to mold me. It told me what I should be. Hungry, violent, cold, cruel. He shook his head. But I don't care what the world says I should be. He took another step. Eldur stood still now, sword forgotten. Too many people spend their lives performing for mirrors, trying to please others, to be liked, admired, accepted. They forget themselves. They become masks, costumes. He touched the chrome mask gently. This mask I wear, it isn't to hide. It's to remind me. When I look into a mirror, I don't see myself. I see what the world has tried to make me. 1,000 versions colliding in the glass. But I kept the one truth sacred. He paused. The truth of who I am. The chamber darkened, not in malice, but in weight. Snow swirled around him now like mist. You think this is cheating? This is discipline. This is focus. This is the mind unchained. There is no curse greater than forgetting who you truly are. He turned his back to Eldur. And no power greater than remembering. Eldur stood frozen, breathing hard, but no longer in anger. He felt it now, not defeat, but awakening. The entire trial, the entire battle. The roles reversed was not about testing strength or powers. It was to show them the most dangerous truth. That man is not bound by what others think he should be. Not by the curse, not by the crowd, not even by himself, when he was weak. Winter stopped, standing before the altar of the old gods. He placed one hand on it, spoke without turning. This challenge was never about winning. It was about remembering. Chapter 7. The sun that burns nothing. The castle was silent. Dust floated in the air like slow-motion snow. The tension had drained. The combat ended. Not in blood, but in revelation. Winter stood still beneath the great domed ceiling, his chrome mask reflecting the pale light. Eldur stood across from him, blade lowered, confusion creasing his brow. Then Winter spoke. Neither of us won. He turned away, walking toward the arched hallway that led deeper into the ancient ruin. We've simply opened our eyes. Eldur followed, silent. But, Winter said, his voice colder now, more precise. There must be a victory. He placed one gloved hand on the rusted iron of the castle's double doors. And so, I will claim this one. With that, he pulled them open. Sunlight, real, pure, morning gold. It spilled across the stone floor like a flood. Dust in its path shimmered. Heat kissed the old stones for the first time in 1,000 years. Winter stepped forward. Eldur's hand shot out instinctively. No, you'll burn. But Winter kept walking. He passed the threshold. The light touched him. Smoke began to rise. He staggered. And then he didn't. The smoke stopped. The skin did not blister. His cloak did not catch. The light wrapped around him and held. Eldur stared wide-eyed, his mouth half open. How is that even possible? Winter turned his head slightly. His voice was calm, measured. You already know why the light burns us, Eldur. We are not merely flesh. We are shadow, given shape. We are darkness, bound by hunger. He turned to face the rising sun. And light, real light, infrared, ultraviolet, electromagnetic fields, does not burn our skin. It dissolves the nature of our being. Eldur stepped forward, eyes narrowing. Winter continued. We are made of the dark, not metaphorically. Actually, our curse is more than mystical. It is a molecular encoding, a metaphysical tether to Nocturna's plane of hunger and memory. He raised his hand into the sunbeam. That light does not destroy the body. It destroys the shadow core we are built from. Because where there is light... He turned. There can be no shadow. Eldur nodded slowly. Yes, That's why the curse works. The sun unravels what we are, what Nocturna made us. Winter took a breath. Exactly. He stepped back inside, closing the door. A faint singe on his cloak was the only mark of the light. Then he turned his masked face to Eldur. But I am not what Nocturna made. I am who I chose to remain. They stood now not in the ancient castle, but back in Eldur's sanctuary. The trial was over. The realm of reality's test dissolved, and Eldur stared at him not with anger, but with something older. Respect. How? Eldur asked again. Winter walked to the hearth. The fire was low, the coals still red. I analysed the fields of sunlight, he said, picking up a piece of chalk. He drew on the stone wall. Waveforms, light frequencies, molecular patterns. Infrared penetrates, ultraviolet excites. But the key is the harmonic interference with our core frequency. He circled a spot. Shadow stuff exists on the negative energy spectrum, a field we cannot even detect in normal science, but it reacts to certain light patterns. He turned. So I did what I always do. He tapped his head. I reprogrammed myself. I rewrote the vibrational anchor of my form. My mind told my essence. This is no longer shadow. This is me. Eldur sat down slowly. Winter knelt beside the hearth, eyes gleaming behind the mask. Nocturna gave us a curse, but he cannot erase the spark of volition, the will to define self. He stood. The curse is the same as the world's expectations, Eldur. It tells you what you should be, what you must be. But man is not made to serve another's vision. He is not meant to be shaped by fear, or by hunger, or by dark gods. He is meant to choose. Eldur said nothing. Then slowly he stood, and he bowed his head. You win. Not because of your powers, but because you remembered what most of us forgot. Winter nodded. He walked towards the shadow of the room and let the light from the fire dance across his mask. The man who remembers who he is cannot be defeated. Epilogue. The fire in the sanctuary. The storm had passed. Not just the clash of powers or philosophies, but the inner battles. Each of them had wrestled for too long. Inside the sanctuary, warmth flickered. A hearth blazed with orange light, casting dancing shadows across ancient stone walls. The long wooden table was cluttered with goblets, ancient maps, and scrolls now meaningless. The kind of mess made only by people who had finally earned the right to stop fighting. Sorana sat near the fire, draped in black, sipping something red and ceremonial. Her expression was soft, amused, but always watching. The Alpha lay stretched beside the hearth, a hulking presence of fur and breath, golden eyes, half-lidded, his massive chest rising and falling in slow, peaceful rhythm. He did not speak. He never did. But the room seemed safer simply because he was there. Winter stood by the window, a chrome mask catching the low light. He said nothing, his eyes fixed on the endless snowscape beyond. But he listened. He always listened. Then Eldur stood, the chair scraped back on stone. He lifted his goblet and cleared his throat with theatrical precision. Let it be known, he began, gesturing grandly, that I once beat the most powerful being in existence. He turned, finger extended toward Winter. Yes, you. Don't act surprised. You remember it, don't you? Winter tilted his head slightly, saying nothing. Eldur carried on. The first challenge, the battle, the blood, and I won. Me, Eldur, the very same vampire who once sought to annihilate mankind, now reformed, refined, and undefeated in round one. Sorana arched an eyebrow. Refined is a strong word. Winter finally spoke. So is undefeated. Oh, don't get pedantic with me. Eldur grinned. That one win counts. and by my count, that puts me on equal footing with a being who once made gods tremble just by thinking. Serana sipped her drink again. Well, if we're measuring wins by quantity over quality... The Alpha gave a slow huff of air. Not quite a growl, not quite a laugh, but definitely something. Eldur raised his goblet higher. Mock me if you must, but history shall record this moment. And when it does, let the bards sing. Eldur, slayer of armies, breaker of chains, and victor of challenge won. Winter turned from the window. The mask glinted. I'll be sure to carve it into the wall myself. They chuckled. Even Serana smiled. And for that moment, there were no curses, no gods, no destinies. Only friends, damned, divine or redeemed, gathered by a fire that no shadow dared cross. End. Hey, it's me, Professor Shadow. If you made it this far, you're one of the few. Don't forget to subscribe, because nearly 80% of those who pass through the darkness never stay. And that's okay. Not everyone can handle what dwells in the shadows, but if you can, if you want more, then subscribe and help keep the shadows alive.